We are talking about sales, which is the process of interacting face-to-face with another human being that doesn't necessarily agree with what you think. So I ask, when you go into these types of conversations and you are staring someone in the eyes, how do you go about changing their mind? Facts, you might say. After all, facts don't care about your feelings. So Ben Shapiro keeps telling me, and I'm trying not to listen to him. But he's got a point, in that facts don't care about your feelings, but also feelings don't care about your facts. And that becomes really important when we get to the art of persuasion. Who here has read this book? Excellent book. Thinking Fast by Daniel Kahneman. So the general idea of this book is that our brains process information in two ways, which he calls System 1 and System 2, which is useless, so I've renamed them. I call them the fast feeling brain and the slow thinking brain. He, among others, have shown that while most people like to think that their brains are controlling what they do most of the time, because I think about my life a fair amount, it turns out because your gut thinks so much faster, it ends up making most of the decisions for you in a way that you may not even notice. The metaphor him and a lot of others like to use is a human riding an elephant. Sure, the human is quote-unquote steering the elephant, but if the elephant decides that it wants to go a particular direction, it's going to be really, really hard for the human to steer it in a different one. This is particularly relevant when we're talking about persuading people, because if you're only using facts, you're only talking to the human on top of the elephant, and you only have so much influence over where that pair actually goes. So, you're all here listening to this talk today, which I appreciate, by the way, and I assume you want to know a little bit more about what the pros do when they have to change people's minds for a living. So, the bad news first. There is no one weird trick that is going to magically convince people to think like you do. Instead, what the pros use to put food on the table every month is a process that looks something like this. Now, before I can explain, I think I see some doubt in the audience already. Maybe this looks really boring and complicated, and you would have a point. Maybe the last salesperson you talked to looked trustworthy. Maybe you have ever bought a car. I love these guys' facial expressions because that's totally how I feel whenever I go into a car dealership, just this like plastered smile. Maybe you just don't have the time. Well, my name is David. This is my best impression of Bob Ross at last year's con. And my day job is to sell millions of dollars of cloud technology services every year. So what I'm going to show you today is step by step the process that we use in my job to sell for a living. And I'm also going to translate that process into something that all of you can use to immediately improve your conversations with other people. Take as much or as little advice as you like. There is one goal today. I want you to either have one good conversation or avoid one bad conversation based on something that you hear today. If you do that, everyone in the world is going to be happier, and this will be a lovely 40 minutes well spent. Okay? All right. Now let's start by closing your eyes. And I mean it when I say close your eyes. I promise I'm not going to throw any slides up here and do anything else. So until I tell you to open them, close your eyes. It'll just be a second. Take a moment and pick a cause that you would like to sway others on. And then picture your favorite person that already agrees with you on this. You notice in the news one day that that person has come into unexpected tons of money. We're talking like millions and billions of dollars. And as you get home that night, you get a call from that person. They want to hire you to change other people's minds, and they want to pay you for it. It's great pay, 10 times what you were previously making, but this person doesn't want you to just try. They want results, and so they will pay you based on the number of people whose minds you change. Assuming for the moment that you take the job, and now you need to sway someone to your cause before you get paid, what would be your first move? This is just you at home in the evening. What are you going to do? What are you going to look up on Google? Who are you going to talk to, and how are you going to talk to them? How will you know that you've changed their mind? Because that's when you're going to actually get your paycheck to come in. Take a second and notice, if getting paid is dependent on you changing someone's mind, it changes the stakes a little bit than if you're just doing this for a hobby or doing something on a drive-by. All right, go ahead and open your eyes. See, it was very brief. This is literally the situation that I face in my job every day. This is a rough graph describing generally how sales models work, and the gist of it is, since I'm not paid in euros, this is just an example, the gist of it is someone tells me that I'm going to make some amount of money, for ease sake, let's call it $100,000, and then if I do a bad job, that money does not materialize in some percentage, sometimes large, sometimes small. The good news about it is that this is how sales has been done for decades and decades and decades. So tons of people have put thought into how to better go about this process, and we can stand on the shoulders of giants as we start to do it. In that vein, this is literally the flow that we use at my job. Qualify, discovery, proof of concept, contract negotiation, implement, ramp, and steady state. Obviously, there are fewer contracts to negotiate in the context of casual conversation, but generally speaking, this is a process that everyone that I work with at work goes through. You might say, boy, again, that sounds still really dull and complicated, and it sounds like I'm going to make the rational decision right now to leave here and go get a cookie because that sounds a lot easier, and you would be justified in thinking that because this is my full-time job. So today, instead, we're going to break it down a little bit more simply and walk through this instead. Understand, measure up, think small, see if it sticks, and find more people. Remember, all we have to do is have one good conversation or avoid one bad conversation. And so feel free to take any parts of this that feel like they resonate with you, shamelessly steal them, and apply them to your life, because that's how basically everything is done in sales. I'm going to give you the sales jargon as well as the straightforward terms so that hopefully what I say is clear, and also you have some good Google terms to go back and dig up as much information as you want after we get done with this. But again, take as little of it as you like. It's a little bit higher level because I can't speak to the specifics of every clause that you may want to engage in here in the room, but I can give you this framework that will help you iterate on things as you move forward. I will add, please feel free to take pictures and screenshots as we go. Obviously, this is being live streamed and will be on the web for posterity, and I will also provide a link up to this deck on my website when we're done, so if you miss something, don't worry. Promise it will be there for you. With that, let's dive in. The first thing you have to do when you are thinking about convincing someone of something else is you have to understand them. And I mean really understand them. Like from the surface level stuff deep into their core. For sales, this is called discovery. And it's called discovery because honestly, you may never know what you are about to find once you start digging deep into a given person or context. Now, if you saw this and you thought, gotcha, I already understand the people that I'm talking to, or you thought, duh, obviously I'm supposed to understand that, I'm pointing directly to whoever it is that had that thought and say, look at this part twice as hard. Because no matter how right you may be about a given subject, if you think of the people you are trying to convince like this guy does, that they're monkeys with cymbals clashing together, you got more work to do. People are complicated, and mostly they make reasonable choices within the context that they presented for themselves. So if you think that they're asking irrationally, you generally have to understand their context and where they're coming from a little bit better. This is going to be the hardest part of the entire process, and in fact, your brain should be on fire with how hard it is to think about how another person acts. After all, you are trying to simulate an entire person's other life inside your head. And if you think at all about your own life, like I do, then probably the person you're trying to convince thinks about their life, and so doing that is basically double or triple time on your own brain. I'll add this one thing, which is if you don't do this explicitly, I promise your brain will trick you into thinking that you have already done this and say, no, we're good. I've already thought as deeply about it as possible. But I can almost assure you that you can always go deeper. It starts with listening. Very good spot. If you happen to know someone already in a casual way, just pay attention to the things that they say. That's a good start. But then you've got to start filling in the gaps as you try to understand them. You got to think about things like, how do they go about their day? How do they talk? Who do they spend their time with? What are they doing? What do they read? And what are they looking at? This helps you ground yourself in the activities of their day-to-day and start to understand how they move about the world. But you're all smart. We got to do better than that. We got to go deeper. So then you got to start thinking about, how do these people justify their actions? Who do they listen to, and how do they filter the information that comes into them from all different angles around the world? We all have filters and screens that come up in different directions. So if we try and convey a message to someone and we aren't paying attention to where those walls are, we're going to run into a wall that we may not have seen. But we got to go deeper than that. You guys are still smart, so you got to get even more core to the issue of what people are looking for. If you're trying to convince something of someone, what would they have to give up if they agreed with you? Who would they have to stop talking to? And what relationships would get harder or easier? Do they have any core identities that would start to waver if they started believing in climate change or started thinking that vaccines were maybe not such a bad idea? It is going to be much easier to convince someone if you are playing into the identities that they have, that they're sort of dreams of themselves, than if you try and shatter their identities of themselves. I like this quote in particular. Always remember that to argue and to win is to break down the reality of the person you are arguing against. It is painful to lose your reality, so be kind even if you are right. The best way to think about this is if you are talking to a friend. If you already are friends, great, but if you're not friends, think of them as a future friend. That will help keep you from being an obnoxious person and beating them over the head and maybe pushing too hard on a point that they don't want to hear at a given moment. And instead treating them like someone you are having a good bar conversation with that might be intense, but you're going to go back home and go back to being friends the next day. Treat them like friends, dig deep, get to know them. Lincoln is credited with this. I hope he said this, maybe, maybe not. I don't know that man, I must get to know him better. That's generally the way you should be thinking. A sales tool that we use to talk about this concept a lot is something called the buyer's journey. The general gist is this. Not everyone is ready to hear the same message at the same time. If you have a problem, some people may be unaware that they have a problem. You approach them in a certain way. Other people might be aware they have a problem but have no idea what the specifics or parameters are. That's a different group of people. Other people have already done the homework, done the research, and they're kind of at the last mile on making up their mind on what to do. The key thing is to make sure that you tailor your approach differently to these types of people, because you're generally going to want a softer approach to the people who aren't aware that there was a problem or anything to do, and you're going to want a more firm approach on the people who are already at the last mile and just need to get over the hurdle. This is a great example, and I'm afraid it might be too small to read on the screen. But once you understand who you're really going after, some really compelling stuff starts to open up. So this is an Instagram post that is talking about the MMR vaccine as if it were an essential oil. So I'm going to read a little bit of it because it's brilliant, and I think it might be hard for others to read. With measles outbreaks dotting the country, it's easy to worry about your family's health. Fortunately, I found a natural preventative that is 93% effective after only one use. Oil of Proquad is a homeopathic blend of diluted, attenuated viruses that boost your child's immunity naturally and protects them from diseases that result in nasty fevers, pneumonia, and death. It's blended with natural substances like sucrose found in fruits, gelatin found in bone broth, and electrolytes like sodium chloride and potassium chloride. It's so safe you can even inject it intramuscularly, which you can't do with other brands of essential oils because that's a sepsis hazard. And the little dots of colors in there are emojis, which are sprinkled throughout this message. Whether or not this is effective, let's leave aside for the moment. But note how they've nailed the tone of who they are trying to talk to, down to the emoji usage, which, if I tried to pronounce, would have gotten really complicated. If you can nail the tone like this, you are on your way to being almost at the level where you need to be with understanding someone else. Generally speaking, if you're talking to someone else to convey something to them, you want to be speaking their tone, not your tone. All right, that was step one. Step two, measure up. Or as we say in sales, qualify in or qualify out. Think about the person that you might have been visualizing of in our exercise. If we understand them from step one, we can start asking ourselves some really important questions. I'll take one person in my mind, Ben Shapiro. If I understand what really drives Ben Shapiro, finance, religion, different contexts and political players that he likes to hang out with, it's going to become readily apparent to me if I'm going to be able to convince him of anything. Because if I know he has a vested interest in looking correct making other people look silly, and generally not listening to whoever's across the other side of the table, I can make the rational choice at that point to leave, particularly if he's just in this for the sake of arguing and not to be convinced. That makes him something like a pig. And if anyone knows the expression about pigs, never wrestle with a pig because you end up getting dragged through the mud and the pig has fun. We call these trolls on the internet, but the same principle applies. All of this is to say, qualifying or measuring someone up is about choosing the people that you want to convince. You can understand everyone you like in the world, but that does not obligate you, once you understand it's an uphill battle, to keep going. Go around the hill, pick somebody else. There are 7 billion people in the world. If that one didn't work out, go get another one. No one is forcing you to have any conversations in this context, let alone one that's stacked against you. A pro tip: the more like you a person already is, so let's say you're in the same Hogwarts house, for example, the more likely you are to be able to change their minds about something. If you're a Ravenclaw, you can talk to other Ravenclaws and spread an idea much more easily than if you were trying to reach across the aisle to a Hufflepuff or something similar. It's not that you can't speak to people in different houses. It's just that the warm hearts of Hufflepuffs sort of speak a different language than the people do in the more eagle-eyed house of Ravenclaw, and it will take time and effort to get across that hurdle. So if you have the option, pick people that are more like you rather than people that are less like you. It's okay to have a few high-priority ones on your list if you want to make sure to talk to some people that are different from you. Somebody's got to save the Slytherins and make sure they don't all eat up Death Eaters, that's for sure. But don't make it the only people you go after, or it's going to be really frustrating. There is a caveat I will add to this, in terms of not going after people that don't want to be convinced. Old internet wisdom tells us, do not feed the troll. I don't agree with that. Who's seen Thank You for Smoking? Show of hands. Yes, good hands. Great movie. The cigarette motif is a little bit dated these days, but it is an awesome movie for anyone that hasn't seen it. There is a scene where the tobacco lobbyist Nick Naylor is teaching his son about argument. Nick Naylor is defending vanilla as the best ice cream flavor, and his son is defending chocolate as the best ice cream flavor. After their exchange, where Naylor goes wildly off topic, his son looks at him confused and he says, "You didn't convince me that vanilla was the better flavor." And Naylor goes, "I wasn't going after you. I was going after them," gesturing to everyone that was walking by. If you deal with trolls in that way, where it's not about talking to the troll, but it's about looking good to everyone that's lurking and bystanding, take a deep breath and go for it. As long as you maintain your center, probably take like a 30-second break every time you type something, try not to get tilted. All of those things are key things to keep in mind. But if you're aiming for them, go ahead and argue with a troll. It helps raise the level of conversation, at least in my experience. And I'll give you an example of this. When I was in college, I, for some reason, frequented my college newspaper's online forums, because I'm a glutton for punishment, I guess. And I did exactly what I was describing. So I took a deep breath. I engaged with people who were, they were crazy. I engaged with some people who were crazy, but I did so calmly and reasonably and stood my ground. Eventually, exams caught up with me, and I had to drop it because a 16-page paper doesn't write itself overnight without my help. And a friend stopped me in the hall, and he said, "Hey, I noticed you haven't been on the forums lately. It's really been a different place without you around." And that struck me for 2 reasons. 1, he'd never said anything on the forums ever. And 2, here he was in real life thanking me for some of those things that I'd done. I guess this stuff can impact people in real life. But don't forget, if you spend all your time targeting people that you will never see any effect on, that's going to be really demoralizing after a while. And I promise your energy will start to sap. So focus on people who you can talk to directly and who you can change their minds and see how it moves. The sales tool I want to give you for this section is something we call qualification frameworks. This is one in particular called BANT, stands for Budget, Authority, Need, and Timing. What it essentially is a checklist, so that if I'm engaging with a customer and I don't have these 4 things, I know it's a bad idea for me to move to the next step. Take that idea and apply it to your own work. So if you create a little 3 to 5 question checklist for the types of people that you are talking to, it will help focus your thinking in a tremendous way. Give you an example with vaccines. So if you know about a given person that they have ever ignored their doctor's advice, or if they have ever changed doctors because they didn't agree with them, or if they are in any anti-vax Facebook groups, or if they have an autistic child, if I know those 4 things, I know a lot about whether or not I should continue trying to convince them that vaccines aren't necessarily a pharma scam, right? Because if any of those things stack up the wrong way, then I may just want to leave it to another person. Once you start talking to a few different people, you'll get a sense of what those questions are for whatever your issue is. But write them out and make them explicit, because that's going to help you a lot moving forward. Step number 3, think small. Now, when I say think small, I'm talking about you, everyone in a chair right now, and what you think is going to happen when you talk to another person. Because exceedingly rare, if ever, are there times when a person has been challenged on something that they think, and then they look down, they sigh, maybe they stare off into the distance for a bit, turn back to you with watery eyes, and they say, "Thank you. Thank you so much for telling me all the things that were right that I thought were not right. You've opened my eyes, and now the world has changed. There was light where there was dark, and I'm going to move forward a different person thanks to you." Don't go for that, guys. That doesn't happen. There are rumors that happens in the scientific community when new evidence comes in and disproves a dominant theory, which I presume is what these guys are excited about. I just love this picture. But we're not talking to scientists. Don't do that. Get that out of your head. So while you can't create a full, momentous convert in one conversation, you can sow something. Whether it's a seed of doubt or a new idea, if you plant it at the right time, remember the buyer's journey, some people are ready for some ideas at the right time, and if you plant it in the right way, remember we got to understand them to make sure we talk their language, then your seed might grow, and it might need to turn into something really meaningful. It's kind of like harnessing the butterfly effect and trying to point the tornado that the butterfly makes somewhere in an intended fashion. Hopefully less malicious than this, but you get the idea. The sales tool that I love to talk about in this context is the Challenger sale. There are a number of different frameworks for this, I will say. There's probably more sales books on this than anything else. But the Challenger sale is useful for 2 reasons. One, it's very instructive on how to have a constructively critical conversation. And 2, it will give you a step-by-step framework for how to have that conversation, touching on a lot of the points that we've already said here. You don't have to take it literally. You don't have to take it frame by frame. Also, you can just Google for it. You don't have to buy the book that's out there on Google and stuff. But it's a good framework to follow in terms of starting your conversations. But remember, we're talking to a friend. The goal is not to be obnoxious. The goal is to take that person who maybe just doesn't know that they're on our team yet and remind them that, oh yeah, we are actually on the same team because we actually both think the same way about this idea. We just got confused there. I like to think about this quote a lot. Are you willing to not win in order to keep the conversation going? You don't have to win every exchange. That's not how war is won, and that's not how persuasion is done. There's give and there's take. Make sure you know what the trade-off is worth to you if you choose not to win in a given situation. This is an example from the internet which I hope is real and again is too small to read, so I'm going to summarize here because the point is really good. There's a med student. He's gone into a patient to talk about a well-child visit. It turns out the mom is a big conspiracy nut, and we're talking all over the place, 9/11, chemtrails, etc., and of course, vaccines are a big scam by the pharmaceutical companies to really pull one over on the average people. All right, the med student comes back, he relays this back to his attending physician. The physician smirks and says, watch this. So they go in, they run all the normal stats on the child, everything looks green, comes to vaccines, and they just sort of let her rail for a bit, and she gives all these different reasons why vaccines are worse than the diseases they prevent against, and so on and so forth. And then at the end, the doctor says, have you considered the idea that maybe the anti-vaccine propaganda was seeded by the Chinese or the Russians in order to weaken the US population? kind of breaks her brain for a second. And she ends up agreeing to a modified vaccine schedule. Now, there are some key things to take away from this story. One, the goal is not to dissuade her of conspiracy theories or that vaccines are perfect on their current schedule. She is already on the position that I don't believe in vaccines. If you think small enough, you just got to get her to take some sometime. Mission achieved. Ignore the conspiracy stuff. We can deal with that another day. And second, you'll notice he played into her own language and her own current worldview. We'll deal with the conspiracies another time, but if I give you one that tilts you in the direction that I want to take you, we'll take that and we'll move on from there. Keep that in mind as you go through. Another case. Has anyone heard of Dan Barker? I'm expecting some yes and nods. Yes. It's nice being able to mention a name and people know who he is. Co-president of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, and notably, a formerly fundamentalist evangelical preacher. In his book, he describes his shift from a literalist preacher to an atheist. And it doesn't start with someone throwing a copy of the God Delusion at his head and saying, God is dead, and running away in glee and twirling their mustache. So it starts because he catches wind of the idea that some people in his congregation don't think that the Adam and Eve story might be entirely historical and might have some metaphor in it. Okay, now for a literalist church, that's a big deal. You got to believe every word of the Bible in order for it to go through. But these are good people. And it doesn't say if it's metaphorical or literal. So maybe he thinks about it a bit and says, maybe he'll relax that one belief. And then he gets invited to speak at another church, which thinks a little bit different than his. He's like, all right, well, they seem like good people. Maybe I'll relax that a little bit. And slippery slope arguments aren't normally so perfectly well demonstrated, but basically Barker just sort of relaxes one belief after another until eventually there is no God. Not everyone is going to be as easy as planting one seed with Barker and getting him all the way to the atheist. But the key thing to note is that first little bit, super small. Don't expect the full conversion there, because otherwise you'll miss out on the potential snowballing effect down the road. Step number 4, see if it sticks. Now, the unfortunate part is that this may never happen, depending on who you are targeting. But if you can, I strongly encourage you to see if what you are saying sticks with someone. It can be easy to see if someone is refusing vaccines and then decides to take a modified schedule, but you don't even have to go that far. Maybe they just go see a doctor in addition to using some essential oils. Maybe they drop out of a Facebook group that's particularly feeding some bad ideas. All of these are possible and visible signs. Other topics might be less obvious, like changing their belief on climate change, seen here for what I assume is 2025. Those ideas may only show up in the voting booth, or maybe they never show up at all. And particularly if you're going the thank you for smoking route and trying to convince the people that you're not even directly talking to, you get even less feedback than you would directly talking to someone. It's kind of like trying to, see someone's faces from the stage, which I can promise you is basically not a thing I can do. So, struggling with that feedback can be tough. I'm calling out seeing if it sticks for 2 reasons. 1, do not memorize a script, go find a person, yell it out at them as fast as you can, go home, and give yourself finger guns in the mirror. That is not the route to success. You may have said all the words, but we're missing the point of what we're doing. The second reason is that if you know what change you want, you can make progress towards it and keep track of that. You can adjust your feedback as you go and make sure that you are steering the direction if the unknowns come at you in an unanticipated way, in a way that still works out for you. Progress itself is hugely motivating, and the odds are every person you talk to will not eventually come to your side of thinking. So if you track your progress en route to that, then you're going to be much more motivated than if you just think, I didn't do it again and again and again and again, because sales can sometimes involve a lot of failure. Now, there's no particular sales tool that will help with this, but I strongly suggest keeping a log for exactly the reasons that I just described. That way you can keep track of your efforts and help tweak them as you go. Doesn't matter if you do it in a notebook or if you do it digitally. I use org mode, which is like another 18-hour topic that I should probably get into another time. But however you choose to track it, Keep it in mind so that you can help keep yourself motivated. The last step in this process is to find more people, also known in sales as prospecting. Typically, when you talk about the sales process, this is the first thing you talk about, but I put it last here for us for a very specific reason. When you think about finding more people first, you start thinking about finding a lot of people. And I think it will be much more effective to everyone here if we focus on a better number of smaller conversations than if we try and focus on a large number of worse conversations. So you probably still have someone in your head from our visualization earlier, which is great. Let's think about expanding that a little bit into a larger group of people. There are two reasons for this. Number one, practice makes perfect, and I promise it will be a lot easier for you to walk through anything new if you are new to doing this, or if you're trying to refine it even. Having more at-bats is going to make you better at this, and if you know there's going to be a next time, it takes the pressure off of any one scenario. Very helpful to have more stuff in the queue. The second reason is that you don't want to get too caught up with tunnel vision chasing one magic person. Being specific is great for some of the other steps that we talked about previously, but there are billions of people on Earth. If you slightly tweak the type of people you'd like to talk to, you will add in tens of thousands of people that you might want to have a conversation with. Don't get too tunnel visioned about it. In fact, it can even be useful to talk to someone that is slightly different than your target audience. Maybe they wear a hat, for example. Because that way you can get comfortable with the process as you go through it. It's fine to have high priority targets, but make sure that you have some others as well so you can try new ideas and not worry about if they succeed or fail. Now, there are tons of ways to find people. They vary wildly based on who you are trying to reach. For one example, you could go to a bar. You could go to a con. You could go to a bar at a con, and you could chat up people there. There's lots of people that are just standing around having a drink, open a conversation. Some of them aren't, but some of them are. You could join a club that's different from the one that you usually do. Maybe you join Greenpeace or a hunting club, and you could start getting to know the people there. You could find internet forums and start having arguments there with the caveats that I applied earlier. This is where I spend way too much of my time. You could talk with your family members, though remember, that list is short by nature, and also there are some unusual dynamics and high stakes at play. But that is a group of people. You could flyer on a campus or at any restaurant that has a corkboard. It all depends on what type of person you are trying to go after. My recommendation is to stick to a smaller group of people that you either already know or can get to know better in some sort of group or club. That way, you can focus on making sure that you're being friendly and you might even enjoy hanging out with new people. Quality over quantity. I would also be remiss to note, prospecting is absolutely the worst part of sales. This is the part we have new college grads go do all day because the rest of us don't want to do it. So while we're talking about setting up systems and frameworks here, don't go overboard trying to find lots of new people in a perfect and scalable way. Get 3 to 5 and then just sort of come back to it later once you've had some chances to go talk to those people. Otherwise, you'll spend a lot of time on very frustrating stuff here. So get a couple of people in mind, move on to the next one. I would say this is where sales tools go. There are no real sales tools for this, and professional salespeople have done everything that I have described and more, including throwing their own multi-thousand person conferences and trying to get big name speakers to come to those. And also guessing the entire corporate directory of people's email list by having seen one email that's like the first letter of the first name and the last name. Great, I've got a whole list of names. I'm just going to hopefully spam out all these different emails. And so that's, again, prospecting is a terrible part of the job. So focus your efforts on just getting a couple of more names and moving forward. So that's it, in a nutshell. Translated into terms that hopefully make a little bit more sense while still giving you a few of the sales jargon. If you remember nothing else, I would like you to take 2 things away from here that I think will be the most impactful for everyone in the audience. 1, really understand. Like I said, really, really understand, down to the core values, who it is you're trying to persuade. Because everything that you gain from that is only going to be helpful. And 2, ignore the people who won't listen. I've noticed that sometimes we get caught up speaking to people who are in front of us or who happen to respond to something that we said or otherwise just started to engage, but they may be doing it for the fun of engaging and not for being convinced. Figure that out fast and just ignore those people. If you take these 2 takeaways, you're going to be infinite percents better than where we were previously on all sides of this equation. And remember, all we have to do is have one more good conversation or avoid one bad conversation, and this will be a win. Savvy people in the audience will notice, hey, this is a small ask, isn't it? It's like he's doing the thing. So this is my Twitter handle, FTWin for the win, spelled with the last name. And I occasionally hit publish at www.forthewin.com, ftwin.com, I should say, where you can also find a link to this presentation. You will also find a recording at the Skeptrack website where we record all of the different things. So, thank you all very much for listening to the presentation part, and now we get to do Q&A if anyone has any questions. And no questions is fine. Yeah, by all means, step up to the mic.
Well, I'm going to break a rule and not ask a question, but I want to
so
tell
a
quick story because it's an encouraging, uplifting story. On the way to my hotel from the airport, there was a driver who passed the gay district in Atlanta, and he scoffed and he said, "The rainbows are everywhere." And I said, "Well, what's wrong with that?" And he said, "I kicked out a gay couple just last night. They were kissing." And I said, "What's wrong with that?" So I engaged him in this conversation about his prejudices. And I said, scientifically, it is not a choice. A person is born homosexual and they must be accepted for who they are. He said, "Science is behind that?" I said, "Yes, scientifically proven. Look it up." And he thought about it. He dropped me off. He said, "I've been thinking about it, and I'm not going to be a bigot anymore."
That's great.
That's a good little story. For everyone, speak up, say what you really feel, and you might convince somebody.
Mm-hmm. I would emphasize from that story, conversations can be anywhere. You can practice talking to people wherever you go, from drivers that you may be working with, people that are behind the counter. Remember, people have jobs to do, so certainly don't harass people if they have jobs to do. But you'd be surprised once you start looking for conversation where you might find it. Please, go to the mic.
So I live in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I'm a board member for the Taiwanese Association of America, the NC chapter. I was wondering, how would I find people who might support or want to sponsor our organization?
That's a good question. And I will be upfront in saying that might be a little bit outside of my area of expertise, which I apologize for. But my initial intuition would be to find like organizations like yours in whatever dimension that you think is the most appropriate, and start figuring out who their funders are and how they are driven. Because you're going to find, I imagine, one of 2 sides. There's going to be a large donor effect, or there's going to be a small donor effect, probably both, but one will be more dominant than the other. And I can't speak to what the donor patterns would look like for your organization, but I think that looking for the closest like organization to yours will give you the next key. And I'm not going to say any more at risk of saying something stupid.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for that talk. It was wonderful. So when you were talking about the prospecting, it seems to be the thing that's the least popular. Where do you find people hit the most resistance? Is that where you're finding folks the most resistant, or is there another step of it in implementing these techniques that you've described?
I think the most resistance is around understanding the people that you don't know, because a lot of us like to think that we've come to our own decisions through 3 or 4 things that might have entered our brain, whether we read them or we heard them or something along those lines, and we don't consider the broader context in which we live our lives. So the understanding of other people is by far the hardest part. And if you get that right, everything else is going to come much more easily. So I would focus on that if at all possible.
Hello. mine's kind of like a two-part one.
Sure.
One is there kind of a certain sweet spot that's like a amount of target like persona or customers that you should be looking for as a business? Whether, and this is in the second part, but this just comes onto it. Whether, so you work for a SaaS company, so is yours primarily like B2B or B2C?
B2B.
Okay, B2B. So is it for companies that are almost that hybrid, like, is there a sweet spot amount that you should be looking for, like those target personas for each side of the business? And if so, is there kind of like a good number of...
From a personal side or from a business side?
From a business side.
It depends on which section of the process you're talking about.
Okay.
I find that it's useful to engage with someone on the order of 3 to 4 at max.
Okay.
So that way you can really spend a lot of the time and energy to understand where they're coming from.
Sure.
From a prospecting perspective and having people that you could be talking to, more is generally better. Having enough so that you know you have a next time whenever you have an off day is sufficient.
Okay. And so for those that you've identified, have you seen that more like sociological factors play into their decision making, or is it more personality driven to factors that have played into their decision making to like complete a end sale process?
It runs the gamut.
Okay.
Some people are driven by one and some people are driven by the other. It's useful to think about it from both ways because the sociological perspective helps to keep in context all of the different things that are going on around a person, which may be drivers that are otherwise hard to identify. But also some people are just really stubborn, and I'm thinking of someone in particular who is just a jerk. But I have to deal with him like every other day. And that's just how some people are.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. If there's no more questions, I don't want to keep anyone here, but that's a cue for an outro, I think, yeah?
Well, thank you very much. That was really a wonderful talk. Do you want to give us the 30-second shameless plug?
There is no 30-second shameless plug. That is my Twitter handle. That is my website. I probably haven't hit publish in a long time, but if you want to read what's there, feel free.
And remember that you can watch this video on the video.skeptrack.org and see the other videos that have happened today. I think I see Margaret lurking over there in the corner that's going to try to recruit folks for the parade. Please come. It's a lot of fun to participate. And if you are willing and able to donate to the American Heart Association, DragonCon is collecting funds which will be matched to donate as a convention to the American Heart Association. Heart disease is the #1 killer of everyone, so please donate generously. Margaret, I'm sure you have some more folks that you need to participate in the parade. Thank you so much. Okay. Banner. I heard you say something about banner carrier. Okay. So please come back for our later talks. Thank you very much. See you later.